Welcome, everybody. My name is Mikey Mhenna. I'm the executive director of Afikra. Thank you so much for joining. I am very pleased to introduce our special guest. Ghazi Al Mulaifi is a PhD and from NYU University in applied ethnomusicology from New York University in 2016. In addition to working as an assistant professor of music, he's also a Venice Biennale artist, composer, a Khaleeji-jazz musician, and an ensemble leader. Currently, Ghazi is based in Abu Dhabi, but today we're going to be talking about his work, most specifically focused on Kuwaiti pearl diving. Ghazi, thank you so much for joining Africa Conversations.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me, and thanks for everybody for tuning in and supporting tonight.
Yeah, so I guess let's start with a little bit of maybe biographical information. So my understanding is that you grew up in Kuwait, but is that true, first of all?
No.
Okay, so where did you grow up?
So my father works in the Foreign Service. So I grew up in San Diego, Damascus, Tokyo, Bonn, and Buenos Aires, and then the last 20 years before moving back to the Gulf in the United States, the last 10 of which in New York.
So having such a world perspective, what drew you into this idea of focusing on a specific genre of music that is, hyper local?
Well, I mean, it kind of happened very organically. During the Gulf War, my family was stationed in Bonn, Germany, and most of our family who were out of Kuwait came and stayed with us, and I was very close with my grandfather, Allah yarhamah, and so one day we were getting ready for lunch, and he was wearing a wizar, a sarong, and I'd never seen him wear that before, and I asked what that was. I asked my father what he was wearing. And he said, it's a wizar. Your grandfather was a Nakhda. And I don't know what Nakhda means because it's not an Arabic word, but it means captain, shipmaster. And, here I am very close to my grandfather. I was a teenager at the time, maybe 13, 14 years old. And then there was this kind of hidden thing that was never talked about. All of a sudden was just, it's kind of a big surprise. And I've always gravitated towards music. And I found out that this tradition that has been kind of, not necessarily hidden, but for some strange reason not spoken about, also had something very musical. It felt like a really organic entryway into my Kuwaiti culture. Of course, I speak fluent Arabic, and Arabic music was all encompassing in the home and so on, But this idea that I could really see myself in this space that was, adventurous and deep and musical was really, really exciting to me.
So when your father was telling you about your grandfather, were you surprised that he was a captain of this, a pearl diving captain, and you were surprised by that fact? Or were you surprised that that was even a thing? Were you aware of the genre, of the sort of the practice, this trade?
No, I wasn't aware of anything at that point. And I was really, both. I mean, I was both very surprised and my grandfather was a very gregarious man and very outspoken, great sense of humor. And, so when I asked him about this tradition, I said, tell me about the sea. He responded, "الرجال ماتوا بالبحر," the men died at sea. And I asked him a few more times. He said the exact same sentence, and then I just knew not to ask again. This also made me really more curious and made me want to start, fishing around my own family and asking some of the other elders what is going on. And there was always a lot of reverence around this topic, more than secrecy, certainly reverence, and it's not for light conversation, let's say.
Would you say that most Kuwaitis of your generation didn't grow up knowing much about this tradition?
Yes, I would definitely say that. And I would say a lot of Kuwaitis today don't know much about this tradition.
So at what point in history did it switch? At what point did it go from commonplace to, I don't know if taboo is the right word, but outside of the commons, the common square?
Yeah, well, it was outlawed in 1955. It was outlawed as Kuwait was moving from a pearl harvesting society into a oil producing nation on its way to becoming a nation state in 1961. But it was outlawed. There was a new vision, and Kuwait wanted to modernize itself, and so that's one part of it. But the other part of it is it was such a difficult way of life that many people were very much willing to leave it. And once I found out more, I realized why my grandfather didn't feel like talking about it much and would rather move on with his life.
So for those of us who are ignorant, I'm going to ask you questions as if I'm a dumb 15-year-old. So how much of the economy was the pearl diving industry? I mean, how much of Kuwait focused on this industry?
I mean, very modestly, 75, 80%.
Okay.
If fresh water had to be imported in Kuwait from Shatt al-Arab, I mean, there was no fresh water to drink. The pearl was the only main economic resource, and it was traded. And so if you think of Kuwait's location in relation to Basra in Iraq, there was so much trade going through there. And so what the Kuwaitis used to do back then was lower their tariffs to really, really, really low prices in order to encourage those traders coming through to trade their leftover goods or whatever with the pearls that the pearl divers had harvested in order to, fund the other trips to Northeast Africa, Zanzibar, and to India. Most people think, Bombay, but it was actually Calicut was the main.
So
Indian.
were these boats, were there companies that employed captains, or were captains mini entrepreneurs that had their own boats and took laborers onto the boats? How did it work?
Well, so there was a perpetual system of debt. I mean, everybody was in debt. So there were a few ways this happened. So there were merchants who had some money, and they would hire. Some of them might have owned ships, and they would hire a shipmaster, a Nakhda, and who was also a pearl diver, by the way. The Nakhda is not a luxurious job by any means. And he would go around town finding his crew, and mind you, pearl divers in Kuwait were locals mostly, and at least 90% were locals, and they were highly revered in society, although they were some of the most highly taxed, physically and emotionally taxed people as well, like soldiers in some ways. My family was in a little different situation. We were called, our nickname was the Nakhda, the shipmasters, but we were pearl divers who scraped up enough money to buy our own ships. So we never became the wealthy merchants, but we never had to pay them to go pearl diving. So that was also a really huge point of, you could say, pride for my family, that we were blue collar in some ways, but self-sufficient at the same time.
So I want to switch to the music in a second, but before I ask that question, has music always been a big part of the act of pearl diving in the Khalij?
I mean, certainly I can speak for Kuwait and Bahrain, because those are the areas that I'm most familiar with, although a lot of these traditions are shared among the entire coastal Gulf. A lot of the music repertoire is shared because these boundaries weren't as clear not so long ago. If the way the elders talk about it is, if the pearl divers were not sleeping or praying, there was a song for everything that was happening on the ship. Be it, I'm going to pick up this object and take it from the one side of the ship to the other. We call it a shela, literally the picker upper, the shela. There's a song for that. So as long as they weren't sleeping or praying or eating or underwater, they were singing. Yes, there were songs for everything. And it was actually a way in which the shipmaster, the Nakhda, could tell the Naham, who's a hired singer aboard the ship, to instruct the crew indirectly. So if he wanted to tell them to raise a sail, he would say, "Adrab salli," and then the Naham would start singing a song that it's called khatfa, and khatfa is to raise a sail. So there were all these ways that the music played a role that was indirectly telling the crew what to do on one end, organizing the rhythms would organize the movements of their bodies on the other end, and as a spiritual function, something that created a sense of, gave them a cathartic spiritual release to their pain.
Okay, so this group, if you can just give a little bit of an introduction into who this group is, and then I'll play a song and we can talk about it.
Sure. This is the فرقة Mayouf Mejally البحرية. Today it's called the Sha'biyya. It's an ensemble in Kuwait that's been around since 1936. When pearl diving started to decline in the 1930s, a lot of pearl divers felt displaced, and basically they found duawin, the diwan, majlis, these places where they could privately play their music, and so Mayouf Mejally is one of 5 families that did that. There's Mayouf Mejally, Al-Amiri, Al-Mas, Al-Asfour, and of course Bin Hussein. These are the 5 ensembles that used to be one ensemble. So Mayouf is one branch of the original 5. Yes.
Great. So let's see if this plays and you can hear it. Give me a thumbs up if you can hear this when it comes out. So walk us through a little bit of the language. What are they saying and what are they singing? And then rhythmically, there's a lot of really interesting things rhythmically in terms of what's going on. So walk us through a little bit of what we just watched.
Yeah, so Kuwaiti pearl diving music has 2 categories: work music and what we call ins, wanasa, fun music. So this is considered ins, and so this would be a recreational music played when they were not pearl diving. The lyrical content of ins is often romantic, but in this particular piece, you could hear a lot of devotional. Devotional, like homage to the Prophet, and there are lots of similarities between Bahri music of Kuwait and the dhikr you find in Sufi music. You can feel that it has a trance kind of quality in its repetition, and the elongated words are supposed to also kind of put you in a state of reflection. So I'm happy to share the poetry maybe
Yeah.
throw it up on. I have a website that I can throw it up on. But I'm actually working on a book right now where we're translating all the poetry and putting it in a collection and going through the diwan. But yes, this music is technically recreational music, but in some ways it's also very, in some ways it's reminiscent. I mean, it's reminiscent of the blues to me in some ways.
Yeah, I mean, when I first heard about pearl diving music, the first analogy that came to mind was sort of like work songs that you would, that slaves would sing picking cotton. But were the men who were going out on these boats, were they, being forced to do this? This is an arduous job, clearly, but is there something about sort of the music as a means to survival?
I mean, people weren't forced to do this, but it was necessary to do it to survive. So they were indirectly forced, but no one was forcing them.
Sure.
Per se. And their difficult life that was necessary for survival would not have been possible were it not for this music and for its spiritual content.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the Naham, there could be one task. The Naham may have 5 different poems to suggest that it's time to conduct that task. And he would choose that poem based on what he thought was necessary for the crew to hear in order to work together to complete that task. And it was usually spiritual music.
Yeah. So I'm really curious about when these men came back to shore, did this music sort of integrate into society where they're, limericks and sort of hymns or songs that other people would sing anyway outside of the boat that were from the sea?
This was generally a very private music.
Okay.
Because most of these sailors, when they would perform it in their diwaniyas, even today, get very emotional. And it's kind of a place to, the diwaniya can be kind of a memorial in some ways. And it's a place to express grief and remember lost friends and to process trauma. So the Mayouf Mejally Ensemble, Mayouf Mejally Al who's Sulaiman's father, who's the gentleman on the right of the screen, kind of looking to his left. And Sulaiman's father, Mayouf Mejally Al he, in the 1970s, I think it was 1972, he decided to open up his diwaniyah to the public. And he had the foresight to say, if we don't open the diwaniyas and let anybody in who's interested in learning this music and this poetry, then it's going to die with us. And so as soon as Mayouf Mejally opened his diwaniyah, the other 4 followed suit. And Are
they the same songs? Can they play together essentially or no?
Sure, but there are small variations. So Sulaiman's nephew is also in Mayouf and in his ensemble, but he used to play with another ensemble. So if they're playing the same song, he may have a slight variation on the way he hits the percussion, and Sulaiman will say, "Why are you playing it like Ben Hussein's diwaniyah? This is your diwaniyah." So there's slight variations, but of course they can all play. They can all perform the same music, but when it comes to the poetry, they will have memorized different poems based on their personal tastes.
Yeah. And can you just give us names for these instruments that they're playing right now?
Sure. So the clay pots are actually water storage devices. We call them in singular ihala and plural ihal. The large drum, the large double-headed drum, we just call it tab al-bahri. This is sea drum, and most likely imported from India. Same with the ihal, the clay pots. And the hawan is the what is like a mortar and pestle. It's like just to grind food. I mean, so like, the hala and the hawan are both, you could say, found objects that happen to make sounds that are but yeah, and what's not in this video and some other videos, there's a marwas and there's a few other instruments, but these are the base. The tab al-bahri is the most important. The drums, the big drum is the most important one.
Yeah. So as through your studies, musically, is this borrowing, it sounds to me, when I hear it, it sounds a lot like it's borrowing from, from the sort of Asian subcontinent and from Africa. Are there specific strands that you were surprised to find that, oh, this sounds super similar to this, or this sounds super similar to that? Or were there trade routes that you think informed some of the music that, surprised you?
No, I was not surprised. I wouldn't say there are influences. I would say that what makes this music is these interactions with the civilizations that the pearl divers went and traded with, and the merchants when they traded. So when I think of Kuwaiti pearl diving music, I don't think of the geographic location of Kuwait and this localized music that only happens there. It is a music born of trade. It is born of change and exchange and dialogue, and this idea of being in dialogue in order to survive. You only have one resource, and like I mentioned earlier, you don't have even fresh water. You have to engage with the people around you and the civilizations around you in order to survive. And so this happened socioeconomically, I mean on an economic level, but certainly culturally, certainly musically, certainly culinarily. I mean, the rupee was used in Kuwait until the 60s.
So, as a professor who's now working in the region, and you said, as I'll get to you as a performer in a second, but as a professor, I'm curious how students in the region sort of have reacted to this information and reacted to your work, and your work sort of resuscitating almost this art form, being one of the people doing that.
I would say by sharing stories that they normally don't talk about with me.
Yeah. Interesting. So they're bringing their own stories to the.
Sure.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Super cool.
Yeah, it's been a really beautiful experience to hear these things, and maybe not right from the outset they're not necessarily feeling comfortable, but once they understand that this history is what it is, a lot of things become more a lot of things can become more easily approached.
Cool. Do you mind if I play this clip here, the pandemic edition? Because I thought this was really delightful, and I thought it demonstrates a lot of the rhythms and stuff like that you guys are working with. And then you can tell us who these people are.
Okay.
So before we keep on going, can you just give us a little sense for the musicians on the call? how would you translate that into sort of a Western musical framework in terms of time signature and what the form is?
Yeah, so the rhythm is Salt Arabi,
Mhm.
and it's in 6/4 or 12/8, depending on how you're counting it.
Yeah.
The main instrument is the hand drum, the marawis and clapping.
Yeah.
Um, uh, this genre of salt is one that is more creatively based, more of like an art for it was like a higher art, I guess you could say, with
Mhm.
higher poetry, lots of poetry from Iraq and so on were in it, and it was certainly kind of like court music in some ways.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What's the and then there's a gentleman who jumps up and dances. Is there a specific dance associated with this?
Yeah. It's like it's showing off. It's just having
Yeah.
fun and just showing your moves. And usually you go over and dance to somebody across the room that you're trying to tease, or
Yeah.
or have them come up and dance with you. But this is definitely joyous, fun music.
It's like the breaks. These are the breaks.
Yes. It's
Okay.
really, and Awad Douki is the singer is a very famous Kuwaiti musician who's passed away, Allah, but he's an unbelievable musician.
Okay. So this is the modern Khaleeji ensemble reproducing that same sort. Okay, so I encourage everyone on the call to check this stuff out on YouTube. It's really, really nice. So who are these small rectangles in black in this
Yeah.
black space?
So before the pandemic really hit, I was speaking to a gentleman whose name is Matthew Quayle, who I think is on this call. Hey, Matthew. And he was the program head at New York University Abu Dhabi's music department, and I was trying to tell him that maybe I should try to establish a modern Khaleeji ensemble.
Yeah.
And he very graciously allowed me to do that. And so I started to rehearse with these students who enrolled in this class in person using traditional Kuwaiti instruments that I had brought from Kuwait, and with my ensemble Boom.Diwan. And so when the pandemic really hit and we had to move to an online format, my students wanted to continue performing music and suggested hitting pots and pans and whatever found objects they had. Initially, I couldn't imagine it happening, and then eventually I thought better of it and gave it a shot, and learned how to use this software and kind of made the transition. But these are my modern Khaleeji ensemble students who were very brave and very creative, and in finding ways to make music with found objects. That in itself was reviving this tradition of change and exchange.
Yeah, it seems apropos.
It was a really special moment when this happened.
Super, super cool. So I'm curious about your collaboration with Arturo Afaril, who is an Afro-Cuban jazz musician. And I'm curious what this project, how it started, what the inception was. And, if you told me just the idea that these two groups would be playing together, I would be somewhat surprised. But now, after hearing it, it seems it clicks because there's a lot of that sort of polyrhythmic, maybe is the right word or not, but percussive in the percussion in the background that sort of creates this this groove. But yeah, walk me through how this started.
Arturo Farrell, the Afro-Latin Jazz Orchestra. So Arturo was in conversation with Bill Bragan, who's the director at the Art Center in Abu Dhabi, who's also on this call. Hi, Bill. And so Arturo and Bill were talking, I believe, about a book called Cuba and Its Music by, I think, Ned Sublett. And they were wondering about the African influences or roots in the Khalij, the Afro-Khalij.
Mm-hmm.
And so Boom.Diwan, my ensemble, had just started performing here and there, and Bill suggested to Arturo that they come to Kuwait and meet my percussionists. So Bill and Arturo stayed in my home in Kuwait for a few days. I invited the percussionists, who are members of Mayouf Mejally Ensemble, had a piano in my living room, and they started. Arturo and the percussionists started playing, and I wasn't supposed to be a part of this, at all. But of course, I couldn't help myself.
Yeah, your guitar is conveniently there.
If it was just my guitar, it'd be one thing. But I brought my pedal board and my amp, and I
look, it's already plugged in.
yeah. So don't mind me. Go ahead, continue. And then it was kind of like, I kind of squeezed my way in there a little bit. And then that evening, after everybody had left, Bill and I and Arturo were just kind of reflecting on the day, and we started sharing the music. I have a projector in my living room, and we just started playing. He was playing Afro-Cuban music, I was playing Khaleeji music, and then he asked me to play some of my music. And then when I played some of my music, this song that you actually have up on Mayouf was kind of just like a sketch at the time. And he had asked me, hey, would you want to perform with me at this concert? And I, of course, said yes, and then talked to Bill later and said, I know this was not part of the plan. Is this okay? And Bill also very graciously said, it's Arturo's show. If this is the way it's going to go, this is the way it's going to go.
Cool. Let's listen to a little bit of it. I think that's starting at the beginning. Should we start at the beginning, or should I jump anywhere specific?
The beginning's cool.
Great.
don't like to sing.
Okay, I could listen to the whole thing, but just out of time so we can open up to questions. So I'm curious, what was the writing process like? So you started with the sketch, the original sketch on the guitar in the beginning, and then you had some idea of the rhythm, or how did it sort of unfold?
So in the earlier photos that you had of the pearl diving, all the things outside. So when I was doing my field work to finish my degree in music, so I had to do some go do some applied stuff. So I went pearl diving, and I met the guys from the Mayouf and Mejally Ensemble there. A lot of those guys who went pearl diving with were later became my friends. Yeah, and so the gentleman actually in this screen, on the bottom left, Abdulaziz Al-Hmili, is the Naham of Mayouf, the Mayouf Ensemble. So him and I used to spend a lot of time in my studio in Kuwait, my home studio, and I would initially record him performing Kuwaiti pearl diving music for my own personal archive and for my research. And one day he said, "Want to play some guitar on this on these rhythms?" And I said, "Yes, I have been waiting for this question for a very long time." And,
Like finally.
Finally, right. So I would play. This is how we write in Boom.Diwan. It's him and I a lot of the time. I'll play things, and he'll say, "This is what's going to work for this piece."
A specific question about this. Would that guy, I'm sorry, I forgot his name, but would he say, "I am a musician"? Would he describe himself as a musician?
Yeah, I think he would. Sure. Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. I mean, he says he's an aham, but sure. I mean,
Beautiful. I want to open up to, I want to get to our quick Q&A in a second. There is so much great music that you have online, so I really highly recommend people to go check it out. And there is a workshop that you're giving, and I'll talk about at the end, at NYU on February 14th. That's worth checking out as well. So let's do our quick Q&A, and then we'll open it up to everybody. So what are you reading or watching right now?
oh man. So I'm actually reading The Art of War for the first time. Don't ask me why, just curious. And I'm actually also reading a book about practicing music written by Victor Wooten. It's really good, but it reads like a child's story. But those are the two books that I'm honestly currently reading right now.
Okay. Yeah. Interesting. I don't think he practices like like the kids.
Well, I mean, you would think not, but that's what the whole book is about.
Interesting. Okay.
Is to be a kid and to practice like a kid, and that's how you keep practicing.
Cool.
Yeah.
Who would you love to shadow for a day, past or present?
Ooh. John Coltrane.
What album?
Love Supreme.
Great. What do people most misunderstand about your work or your line of work?
That they think I'm doing something new.
Cool. Whose work do you admire or are inspired by?
Oh, that's a really tough one. I mean, I would say Arturo Farrell, to be honest. Yeah.
I'm curious, since you're on that, what's the one thing that you've learned from him that has really stuck with you? It's probably more than one, but so far, if you want to share one about performing or about writing or about music in general or running,
Sure.
having a band.
That he says, if I feel that there's a ground underneath my feet, I'm doing it wrong. And to be comfortable with that. Yeah. He's taught me to be okay with being really uncomfortable, and that's the direction. If that's the direction where my art's going, that's where I should go, and just be okay with being afraid.
What are you afraid of right now? What are some of the things that you're working on that you're like, oh, yikes, I don't know if this is going to work?
Okay, so I'm working with Nduduzo Makatini right now, and he's a South African piano player, first Blue Note artist, incredibly generous human being, but really a monster musician. And we just finished co-composing a suite for the Barzakh Festival. We'll be performing on February 6th online. hosted obviously or curated by New York University at Abu Dhabi. So when he accepted, to work with me, then I was like, wow, this guy's going to work with me and discover that I'm a horrible musician. So that was my fear, yeah.
Yeah.
But it's then I was all like, well, there's no ground beneath my feet, so I must be doing this right. And
You're like, and compared to him, everybody's a horrible musician.
yeah, and but yeah, at the end of the day, we made some really beautiful music that I'm really happy about, and I'm really eager to share with everybody.
Cool. That's awesome. That's great advice. Um, okay, let's open up to the questions. The first question is from Layla, and I think she's asking you about the name Nakhda. Where is this name? Yeah, where does this name come from?
So the short answer is it's not Arabic,
Yeah.
and it's most likely Persian. And it's the term that we use to say shipmaster, but it is not an Arabic word.
And out of curiosity, as we start going through this, I didn't get a chance to ask you this beforehand, but what is the difference of sort of the pearl diving music across the Arabian Peninsula?
So there are lots of similarities. Okay, I'm going to tell you what I know,
Great.
and that I
That's all
could
you can.
be wrong about some things. But what I'll tell you is that there is a shared repertoire between Kuwait, Bahrain, Qatar, and to some extent the Arab Emirates. But countries like Oman that had a much greater engagement with the slave trade had music that was a lot more Afro-centered than the other. So there's a lot of shared music, but it would be a great misconception to say that everything was shared and it was all pretty much the same. No, that is not true. There's a huge variety, and at the same time, a lot that is shared.
And how much did that music that is really coastal music penetrate the sort of internal parts of the land and sort of enter into the desert, if at all?
Yeah, not very much. And in fact, there's like a division, between Bahri music and Barri music, desert and sea music. I know very little about music of the desert, and most of my friends who are into Bahri music may know a little bit about. It's just they're totally different genres, totally different ways of music making. Sure.
And it didn't sort of like migrate up into Iraq and Damascus and other parts of the region.
Oh, so maybe not these exact same rhythms, but a lot of the poetry that's used in Kuwaiti pearl diving music is like the zheriyat. Those poetic forms are directly from Iraq.
Yeah.
Certainly some Levantine influence as well, Christian Levantine influence on Kuwaiti Bahri music.
Okay, Lily wants me to ask her a question as well. Her question is, what's your take on modernizing traditional or cultural music? Is it to encourage the younger generation to have an appreciation towards it?
I hope that the younger generation will like what we're doing. For me, it's a really personal project in some ways. So if all the music that was made, in the time of pearl diving was playful and open and dialogic and fluid and transcultural, transnational, and we live in a moment where these ideas of the nation and heritage are very rigid, and there isn't as much playfulness. So what I would like to do with this music is encourage dialogue and playfulness and trying to kind of reach and understand and not have so much at stake of saying I am me and I am from here and this is my. No, like it's a push against that. Yeah.
Cool. Okay. Unsu, I'm going to ask you to unmute so you can ask your question.
Hello. I was curious how your research work affect your creative work, because you just mentioned that you conduct research on Bahri music, but you also are running Boom.Diwan.
Yeah, so my research and my musical life are intertwined. They're not two separate things. So I would say they're very connected. They feed into each other. By playing with Arturo or now in the Duzo, or with members of the ensemble at the university here. It's hard to talk about them as two different things because they are intimately intertwined. It's an applied approach to scholarship where we do these things and we write about them, and I guess the role of like artistic intention and scholarship are very very parallel. But I don't think I could be a scholar without being a musician, and perhaps vice versa, because there is a lot of there's a lot of thought about the intentionality in the art that I create, and not very much intentionality about which direction it's going to go in.
Okay, great. So we have a question from Jan Marie, who is my musician mother.
I didn't catch the name, Mikey, when you said the name of the style of music. I didn't hear it clearly.
Okay, so I think the music was the first thing that we played. Ghazi, do you remember what?
Yeah. So the rhythm is rhythm and so it's Bahri music is the big umbrella, which is music of the sea, but we call Kuwaiti pearl diving music, Bahri music, and the exact song form that was being played is called Haddadi, and Haddadi has the word Hid in it, which you can hear like an edge, and it's the edge of the desert and the sea, like the coast. So we call it Haddadi. We sit on the coast and we jam this music.
Okay, great. Thanks so much. Naila, this will be our last question.
Hey, Ghazi, thanks for your talk. I was wondering, there are like certain features in pearl diving music, such as like rhythm or their call and response dynamic. Can you map them to specific like physical labor or natural phenomena? So for example, are there rhythms that are inspired by like the rhythm of the waves or the rhythm of certain activities?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So there's a lot of argument about that. For example, when there's a kind of song called Dawari, which is used when they're raising the anchor rope after a long day of pearl diving. So basically they start at one pearling bank, and throughout the day they just extend the rope and go through all the pearling banks, and at the end of the day they have to come back and do it. So the Naham will sing something, like Beitur Rasul Makkah Yandina, and then the sailors will return in a drone. And then when they're done pulling, they'll say he. So the drone part, some people argue is that's the drone of a camel, and some people get very upset by that. I don't know why. But then the he part is used to describe the sound of waves crashing on rocks. But there is one that's very clear, and it's a kind of clapping. And sometimes when fish come to the surface of the water, they make kind of like a slapping sound. So there's a kind of clap that's like this, and that's supposed to be mimicking what the fish are doing. But certainly, I mean, yeah, there are definitely, whether there's agreement or not on it, there's definitely a lot of discourse around it.
Great, thank you so much. Ghazi, one last question before we jump off. Is there anyone that people on this call should be listening to? If you were to leave us with one sort of recommendation one thing to type into YouTube when we get off this call to listen to, who would you recommend?
Yeah, I'm gonna have to say Duduzo Makatini. He has a beautiful album, my collaborator, called Modes of Communication, that deals with South African jazz, but also his spiritual traditions as well. So Nduduzo Makatini, Modes of Communication. Deep
Okay.
album. Highly recommended.
Fantastic. So if you're interested in following up with Ghazi, you can find him online just by typing his name. If you look up Boom.Diwan on Instagram or on YouTube, you'll find it as well. There are 2 workshops with NYU coming up as well that are worth checking out. Please do so. And a huge thanks to the NYU team, many of whom are on this call, who helped make this happen, to Reem and Lindsay. Really, really appreciate the work that you guys are doing. And I'm glad that we're able to partner on this work as well. If you're interested in following up with afikra, go to our website, afikra.com. Please give us feedback. I put the feedback link in the call. And if you want to support us and keep us going and growing, you can become one of our monthly supporters as well. Okay, everybody, stay well, whether it's 2 a.m. in Korea or 9 a.m. in LA. I hope you guys have a great day. Bye, everyone.